The chandelier above the conference table glowed with a harsh golden light that seemed to spotlight my shame, every crystal catching my reflection like 100 judging eyes. The air reeked of expensive cigars and sweet champagne, thick and suffocating as if the room itself wanted to choke me. The lawyer's voice sliced through the murmur of anticipation. The estate. $75 million, the Tesla collection, and the mansion on Lakewood Drive will be transferred to your sister. His words didn't just echo, they detonated. The guests gasped, a wave of whispers crashing against the walls, then erupted into applause so loud my eardrums vibrated. My sister's emerald gown shimmered under the lights. As she rose gracefully, the room bowing to her like she was royalty. My father slapped her back with pride. My mother's eyes sparkled with tears of joy, and relatives I barely recognized rushed forward as if she had just been anointed queen. I sat frozen hands trembling against the polished wood, my throat tightening as though invisible fingers pressed around it. My skin prickled every pore, screaming humiliation. I could smell the tang of the champagne being poured beside me, hear the fizz rising in crystal flutes, each bubble mocking me. I had fought my whole life for even a glance of approval, a crumb of acknowledgement, and now in one brutal moment, they announced to the world that I was worthless. My father leaned in his breath, warm with whiskey, his words sharp enough to flay me alive. "See, this is why we never trusted you. You were always destined to fail." My chest tightened, my stomach knotted, bile rising until I tasted acid. The chandelier's glow blurred into streaks of light as my eyes welled with tears I refused to shed. Then my sister twisted the knife. She raised her glass, her lipstick glinting under the gold light, her smile venomous. "Don't worry, maybe I'll let you clean the pool at the mansion," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. Laughter exploded. Glasses clinked, a chorus of mockery filling the air like thunder. I clenched my fists until my nails broke skin, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the scent of champagne. My cheeks burned, my ears rang with the sound of their joy, and my vision tunneled until all I saw was my sister's triumphant smirk. My mother stood silently, her head bowed, eyes avoiding mine, and that silence was the cruelest betrayal of all. It was confirmation I didn't exist in this family except as a punchline. My whole body shook, my pulse racing so fast I thought I might faint. I wanted to scream, to stand and smash the champagne flutes, to demand they see me, but my voice was locked behind a wall of glass, trapped, suffocating. The chandelier's light grew harsher, the room smaller, the laughter louder, until humiliation wrapped around me like chains. At that moment, I knew I wasn't just ignored. I was erased. And yet, as the cheers rose again, a ripple of unease flickered through me. I couldn't name it then, but in the middle of my collapse, destiny was already shifting. Within minutes, the gold light, the champagne, the cruel laughter would all shatter, and I, the forgotten daughter, would rise from the ashes of their mockery with a truth no one in that glittering room could deny. I wasn't always sitting under chandeliers and suffocating on the scent of champagne. My story began in a much smaller house with peeling wallpaper, a squeaky screen door, and the constant buzz of a television that drowned out uncomfortable silences. From the very beginning, the difference between my sister and me was carved into stone. She was the golden child, the miracle, the one who could do no wrong. When she painted a crooked picture in kindergarten, my mother framed it and hung it in the living room. When I brought home straight A's, my father grunted, "That's expected." I can still see the Christmas mornings, my sister tearing into piles of brightly wrapped boxes, unwrapping dolls, glittering jewelry sets, even a miniature car when she turned 16. For me, a sweater 2 sizes too big sometimes with the tag from the clearance rack still dangling. Once, when I was 10, I asked my mother why my sister always had more. She sighed, not even looking at me, and said, "She just deserves it more." That sentence burrowed under my skin and lived there for years. In school, I learned to shrink to make myself invisible, because even my triumphs brought no applause. When I won a science fair, my father didn't attend. Instead, he took my sister shopping for her prom dress. The memory still stings, standing alone under the gymnasium's fluorescent lights, clutching my ribbon, scanning the empty bleachers. Later that night, my sister burst through the door in a glittering gown, my parents circling her like she was a princess returning from a kingdom, and I sat in the corner holding my ribbon that no one cared about. This imbalance bled into adulthood. When my sister graduated college, they bought her a brand new car, a gleaming white sedan with a bow on top. When I graduated, I got a hurried phone call. "Congrats, we're proud of you. No dinner, no gift, not even a card." I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. But deep inside, a hunger grew, a hunger to be seen, to be validated, to finally matter. That hunger made me reckless in love. At 26, I married a man who promised me the world. David was charming, smooth-talking, the kind of man who could light up a room with his smile. For a while, I believed he was my escape from being invisible. I supported him through years of unemployment, working double shifts to pay rent, while he lounged at home scrolling his phone. My family never hid their disdain. My father smirked. "Of course you picked a loser. You always did have bad judgment." My sister laughed. "You married down. Typical." And yet I stayed, pouring every ounce of myself into making it work, until the day he left. It wasn't quiet. He slammed the door. His suitcase already packed his last words like acid. "You have nothing to offer me. You're just like your family says, useless." I discovered later that he had gone to someone else, a woman with money, a woman who wasn't me. Divorce papers arrived like a slap, finalizing not just the end of a marriage, but the confirmation of every cruel word my parents had ever uttered. Betrayal layered on betrayal until I couldn't tell where the bruises from family ended and the ones from marriage began. After he left, I worked harder, buried myself in my job, but the void never closed. Holidays became torture chambers. Thanksgiving dinners where my sister sat at the head of the table, telling stories of business ventures while my father puffed proudly. That's my girl. I sat at the edge silent, my achievements unspoken, my plate barely touched. One year, she handed out gifts to everyone, expensive watches, designer scarves, then looked at me and smirked. "Oh, sorry, I forgot you." My mother giggled nervously. My father raised an eyebrow and I forced a smile, while inside I was bleeding. By the time the inheritance was announced, the pattern had been set for decades. They had trained the world to see her as worthy and me as worthless. I had scars etched into my very soul from their favoritism. And yet, despite all the cuts, some stubborn piece of me clung to hope that one day maybe they would look at me and finally see someone who mattered. That fragile hope is what shattered completely in the inheritance room under the golden glow of the chandelier. Because in that moment with the lawyer's declaration, they didn't just overlook me. They erased me. And I realized the erasure hadn't started that night. It had been their mission from the very beginning. In all the years of being invisible, there was one person who never treated me like a ghost. My grandfather. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, it was with a gravity that made you listen. His hands were rough from decades of work, his eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who had seen too much. And when he looked at me, I didn't feel small. I felt human. He used to sit with me on the back porch during summer evenings, the cicadas humming in the trees, the scent of honeysuckle drifting through the air, and he would tell me stories about our family history. Not the glamorous versions my parents liked to parade in front of guests, but the truths, the sacrifices, the mistakes, the resilience. Once, when I was 16 and had come home crying after being mocked by my sister in front of friends, he sat beside me, placed a steady hand on my shoulder, and said words that would stay carved into me forever. "One day, the truth will set you free. Don't let their blindness convince you that you are less. They see what they want to see, but I know what's in you." At the time, I didn't understand, but I clung to those words like a lifeline. Over the years, he showed me small gestures of trust. When I got my first job, he slipped me a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with his handwriting lessons about work integrity and survival. "This is not for your sister," he whispered. "This is for you. Someday it will make sense." I kept it hidden, treasuring it like a secret inheritance of its own. On my 25th birthday, long before his health began to decline, he called me into his study, a place that smelled of old books and pipe smoke walls lined with ledgers and photographs. He handed me a small brass key attached to a faded ribbon. "Keep this safe," he said. It unlocks something that belongs only to you." I asked what it opened, but he only smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both sorrow and hope, and said, "When the time comes, you'll know." My parents never knew about the key. My sister never suspected the notebook. They dismissed my bond with him as old man's favoritism, never realizing he was laying down a trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow. When he passed, the grief that tore through me was compounded by the emptiness of being excluded yet again. At the funeral, my sister delivered a flowery eulogy about how he adored her, about how she had learned business from him while I sat in the back pew gripping the brass key in my palm until the metal dug into my skin. My parents never mentioned me in their speeches, as though I wasn't even his granddaughter. But I remembered the porch, the cicadas, the words that had kept me alive through the storms. One day, the truth will set you free. Those words would echo louder than ever in the days leading up to the inheritance reading. They would become the spark in the dark, the foreshadowing of a reckoning none of them could see coming. The night of the inheritance reading was staged like a coronation. They had chosen the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel, chandeliers dripping with crystals, marble floors gleaming under golden lights, waiters gliding silently with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It felt less like a legal formality and more like a celebration my parents had been planning for years. Guests filled the room, relatives from across the country, business partners, friends of my parents who whispered and nodded approvingly as they looked at my sister. I arrived alone, walking through the glass doors with a sinking heart, my heels clicking against the polished stone like an unwelcome announcement of my presence. No one turned to greet me. They didn't need to. I was the forgotten one, and everyone knew it. My sister stood near the center of the room in a deep sapphire dress, her hair styled immaculately, her lips painted red like she had stepped out of a magazine cover. Around her swirled admirers, laughing too loudly at her jokes, hanging on her words, lifting their glasses in her honor. My parents hovered nearby, radiant with pride, their posture exuding triumph, as though they had successfully engineered the perfect air. When they caught sight of me, my mother's smile faltered, then froze back into place, brittle and polite. My father didn't bother hiding his disdain. He muttered something under his breath to the man beside him who chuckled, both of them turning away. I felt the sting in my chest, but I swallowed it and walked to the far side of the room, finding a seat near the wall. The chatter swelled a symphony of crystal clinks, rustling silk, and murmured deals. My sister's laughter pierced above it all, high and triumphant, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Every time she threw her head back, the lights caught the diamond necklace at her throat, dazzling like proof of her untouchable status. When the lawyer arrived, the room shifted into hushed anticipation. He was tall, gray-haired, his briefcase polished to a shine. As he walked to the podium, whispers stilled, and all eyes turned forward. The silence was charged thick with expectation. My sister straightened her dress. My parents moved closer together, and I shrank further into my seat. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and began to read. His voice was calm, deliberate, the words ringing out with a weight that made my pulse quicken. The estate valued at $75 million, along with the Tesla collection and the mansion on Lakewood Drive, will be transferred in entirety to your eldest daughter. The words hit like a thunderclap. Applause erupted instantly, cheers filling the ballroom hands, clapping glasses raised. My sister rose gracefully, accepting the congratulations as though she had been crowned queen of an empire. My parents embraced her, tears of joy brimming in my mother's eyes, my father puffing his chest as if he had personally achieved this victory. A cousin shouted, "To the air," and the toast spread like wildfire. Champagne flutes clinking in unison. I sat frozen, every clap of applause, like a nail hammered into my coffin. My cheeks flushed, my hands trembled, my vision swam under the golden light. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thin, poisoned with their delight. Someone leaned near me, a distant relative, their voice dripping with pity disguised as politeness. "Well, dear, not everyone can be a success. At least you can be happy for your sister." Their words sliced me open, salt poured into a wound that had never healed. I forced a smile, though my throat burned. My sister turned toward me, then eyes locking with mine, her smile wide and cruel. She lifted her glass higher, calling out for all to hear. "To family, and to those of us who know how to carry the legacy forward. The crowd roared approval. My mother beamed, my father nodded proudly, and I felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller into the shadows of the room. I realized with a crushing clarity that this was not just an inheritance. This was a public execution of my identity, a declaration that I did not matter, that I never had. Every detail of the night was orchestrated to erase me. The chandeliers blazed too brightly, the marble floor gleamed too harshly, the laughter rang too cruelly. I sat on the edge of the ballroom, invisible, suffocating, wondering if I would survive the weight of this humiliation. And yet, in the midst of that suffocating spectacle, I noticed something strange. The lawyer's eyes flickered briefly toward me just for a second, a glance that did not match the tone of the room. It was subtle, fleeting, but it carried something, an undercurrent, a secret. My heart stumbled. For the first time that night, a spark flickered inside me, though I didn't yet know that it was the beginning of a storm that would turn this coronation into a reckoning. The applause had not even faded when my sister decided the spectacle wasn't enough. She thrived on attention, and now that she had millions, a mansion, and luxury cars to her name, she wanted to make sure the world knew who had won and who had lost. She stepped toward me, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the crowd parting for her like she was royalty. Her emerald earrings caught the light as she leaned close enough that only those nearby could hear, but she pitched her voice to carry anyway. "Don't worry, little sister," she said, her tone syrupy sweet, but her eyes glinting with malice. "Maybe I'll hire you as my maid. You could keep the pool clean, maybe polish the Teslas for me. It's the least I could do to help someone like you." A ripple of laughter spread across the room, cruel and unrestrained, as though her words were the punchline of a grand joke. Champagne flutes clinked, someone slapped their knee, and my father laughed louder than anyone else, his booming voice echoing off the walls. My mother lowered her gaze, pretending to adjust her bracelet, her silence a blade sharper than any insult. I felt my face burn, the humiliation searing through me like fire. My throat tightened, my chest ached, and I could hear the rush of blood pounding in my ears. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the polished floor and never resurface. But my sister wasn't finished. She turned to the crowd, raising her glass high, her smile wide and poisonous. "To family," she declared, "and to the ones who carry our legacy with grace and success. Some of us were simply born for greatness." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The guests erupted again, laughter mingling with cheers, the crystal of their glasses ringing like bells tolling for my erasure. A cousin nudged me smirking and whispered, "She's right, you know. At least she might give you a job." Their pity was worse than their cruelty. My father clapped his hands together, beaming at his eldest, then cast a look at me, one filled with disappointment and disdain. "Maybe now you'll understand," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "You were never cut out for this family's legacy. You lack ambition, discipline, value." Each word was another lash, each syllable another reminder that in their eyes I had never been and would never be enough. My mother's silence screamed louder than his insults. She kept her eyes down, her lips pressed tight, refusing to intervene, refusing to defend me, refusing even to acknowledge my pain. That silence was a betrayal more profound than any spoken word. My knees trembled, my hands clenched into fists so tight that my nails broke skin, and I felt the sting of blood in my palms. I tried to swallow the tears clawing at my throat, but they burned hot, threatening to spill. The chandeliers above blurred into a haze of golden streaks, the laughter grew distorted, and the marble floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My humiliation was not just personal, it was public, orchestrated, celebrated. They had turned me into entertainment, my suffering a stage play for their amusement. In that moment, I was certain I had reached the absolute bottom, that there was no redemption left, no dignity to reclaim. But even in the depths of that humiliation, as I sat trembling in the shadows of the ballroom, a strange flicker of resolve stirred deep inside me. I didn't know it yet, but that night was not the end of my story. It was the spark of something that would burn brighter than their cruelty, stronger than their greed. The laughter still echoed when I noticed the lawyer moving away from the podium. He didn't join the celebration, didn't raise his glass, or congratulate my sister. Instead, he walked slowly around the edge of the room, his polished shoes silent on the marble, his eyes scanning the crowd with a gravity that felt out of place amid the cheers. My heart was still pounding from humiliation, my body trembling when he stopped beside my chair. He leaned slightly, shielding his movement from the others, and slid a heavy envelope across the table toward me. The paper was thick, cream-colored, my name written in sharp black ink across the front. My breath caught. For a moment, I couldn't move my hands frozen against my lap. He looked me in the eye, and in that gaze, I saw none of the pity or disdain that everyone else carried. His voice was low, steady, almost conspiratorial. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this," he said. He instructed me to deliver it only at the right time. My pulse quickened. My fingers twitched toward the envelope but stopped, fear knotting in my chest. What could possibly be inside? Why give it to me here now in the middle of this humiliation? He must have read the hesitation in my eyes because he added, "You don't have to open it tonight, but if you choose to know that everything changes once you do." With that, he straightened, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked away as if nothing had happened. The crowd remained oblivious still, circling my sister, praising her brilliance, already planning how they might benefit from her fortune. I stared at the envelope, my name glinting under the chandelier light, the edges pressing against my fingertips when I finally touched it. It was heavier than I expected, as though it carried not just paper, but the weight of decades. A shiver ran down my spine. I remembered my grandfather's voice the nights on the porch, his words like an anchor in my storm. "One day, the truth will set you free." Was this the truth he had meant? My sister caught sight of me, then noticed the envelope in my hands. Her smile faltered for just a moment before curving into something sharper, suspicious. She excused herself from a cluster of relatives and strode toward me, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. "What's that?" she asked, her voice low, edged with steel. My mouth went dry. I forced my hand over the envelope, holding it close, and said nothing. Her eyes narrowed, glittering with unease, and then she laughed loud and dismissive, tossing her hair. "Probably your bills. Don't let it ruin the party." She turned away, but I caught the flicker of doubt in her expression, the twitch of her jaw. My father glanced at us, but dismissed the sight, too drunk on his own pride to imagine that anything important could involve me. My mother stayed near the bar, sipping champagne, eyes still avoiding mine. The envelope burned in my hand, its presence louder than the music, heavier than the laughter, a secret throbbing in the middle of their triumph. For the first time all night, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation still ached raw and fresh, but beneath it pulsed something else. Anticipation. Resolve. The lawyer's words replayed in my mind, each syllable striking like a drumbeat. Everything changes once you do. And though the room still belonged to them, though I was still the shadow on the edge of their celebration, I knew deep down that the night was no longer theirs alone. Something had begun. I sat clutching the envelope as the laughter swirled around me, my name still burning against the cream paper, my grandfather's voice echoing in my head. My hands trembled as I slid a finger under the flap. The seal cracked softly, almost lost beneath the clink of glasses and bursts of laughter, but to me it sounded like thunder splitting the sky. I pulled out a thick stack of papers heavier than I expected, and at the very top was a letter written in my grandfather's unmistakable hand. The sight of his slanted script hit me like a wave, the scent of pipe smoke and porch evenings flooding my memory. My eyes blurred, but I forced myself to read. To the one they underestimated, it began, "You are not invisible. You were never invisible to me. This family built its empire on more than money. It was built on resilience, on honesty, on grit. Qualities you alone have carried. When the time comes, these papers will tell the truth." My breath caught as I flipped through the rest. Legal documents, a revised will signed and notarized dated just weeks before his death. My pulse hammered as the words burned into me. The estate, the Tesla collection, the mansion and majority shares in the family company, all of it legally transferred to me. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst from my chest. I rose to my feet before I realized what I was doing, my chair scraping sharply against the marble floor. Conversations paused, eyes flickered toward me. Irritation and amusement painted across faces. My sister's gaze snapped to the papers in my hands. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her smile faltering. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking but audible. "I have something to read," I said, holding up the letter. The room quieted curiosity, battling scorn. "This is a letter from Grandpa." I continued, forcing steadiness into my words and a will. A different will. One that names me as the heir. A stunned silence fell. For a beat, no one moved. Then my sister laughed sharp and brittle. "That's ridiculous," she scoffed. "Everyone knows what the will said. You're pathetic making things up to ruin my moment." But her voice wavered and whispers rippled through the guests. I held up the notarized document, the signatures glinting under the chandelier. "This isn't fake," I said. "It's signed, witnessed, filed. Grandpa left everything to me." Gasps rose from the crowd, a collective intake of breath as if the air had been sucked from the ballroom. My father surged forward, his face red, his voice booming. "How dare you! You think you can stand here and make a fool of us! Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." My hands shook, but I didn't lower the papers. "The only embarrassment," I said, my voice cracking then strengthening, "is how you erased me. Grandpa saw the truth. He saw who I really was." My sister snatched a champagne flute and hurled it against the wall glass, exploding in a shower of shards. "She's lying!" she screamed, her voice shrill. "This is some trick." The lawyer stepped forward, then calm and unflinching, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble. He cleared his throat, drawing every eye. "What she holds is no trick," he said evenly. "Mr. Henderson, your grandfather entrusted me with this document. It is the last and only valid will. I was instructed to deliver it tonight in this very room should the family attempt to conceal the truth." A hush fell heavier than any silence before. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering at her feet. My father's jaw dropped, his face draining of color. My sister staggered, her hands trembling as she pointed at me. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, this isn't happening." But it was. The tide of the night shifted in that moment, the glittering ballroom that had felt like my cage transforming into my stage. The guests who had laughed at me minutes ago now stared in shock, their whispers changing from mockery to awe, from dismissal to speculation. I felt my chest swell, not with pride yet, but with vindication. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. The truth had finally been spoken, and it was mine. The ballroom erupted into chaos, voices colliding in a storm of disbelief. My sister shouted over the noise, her face-red veins bulging in her neck. She forged it. "This is a lie, a disgusting trick." My father grabbed the papers from my hands, flipping through them with frantic speed, his eyes darting across the signatures, his breathing shallow. My mother clutched his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, her face pale as porcelain. "Tell me this isn't real," she whispered, but her voice quivered, betraying the fear clawing at her chest. The lawyer did not flinch. He raised a hand, commanding silence with nothing but composure. His voice cut through the pandemonium like a blade. "I anticipated this reaction, which is why Mr. Henderson instructed me to bring proof beyond dispute. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will direct your attention to the screen." He gestured, and two assistants wheeled in a projector and screen from the side of the room. Gasps echoed as the lights dimmed, the chandeliers fading to a soft glow, the room holding its breath. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly there he was, my grandfather, recorded just weeks before his death. His familiar face filled the room, his voice gravelly but strong. "If you are watching this, it means the truth must be spoken aloud. I loved my family, but I could not ignore the poison of favoritism, the blindness that threatened to destroy us. My eldest granddaughter has been showered with gifts and praise, but it is my younger one, the one forgotten and ridiculed, who carries the true values I hold dear. To her, I leave my estate, my home, my cars, my shares. It is my wish, my command, and it is final." The words crashed through the ballroom like an earthquake. My sister let out a strangled cry, covering her ears as if she could block them out. My father stumbled back, his mouth hanging open, sweat beading on his forehead. My mother's knees buckled and she sank into a chair, her lips trembling. The guests murmured in shock, some clutching their pearls, others exchanging glances that flickered with judgment and disdain toward the family that had just been exposed. My sister lunged toward the screen, shouting, "This is doctored! It has to be fake!" Her voice cracked, hysteria seeping into every word, but the lawyer remained steady. This recording was notarized, time-stamped, and filed with the court. There is no question of authenticity. The will she holds is binding. Any attempt to contest it will only expose your deceit further. My sister froze her chest, heaving her eyes wild. She turned to my parents, desperate for support, but for the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in their faces. The certainty that I was worthless had been ripped from them, replaced with a dawning realization that their empire was no longer theirs to control. My grandfather's image lingered on the screen for a moment longer, his eyes seeming to look directly at me. "Never forget your worth," he said softly. "They may deny it, but the truth is undeniable." Then the screen went dark, the silence in the ballroom heavier than the marble pillars holding up the ceiling. I stood there, clutching the papers, my knees still trembling, but my spine straighter than it had ever been. For the first time, the room didn't look through me. They saw me, truly saw me. The validation didn't come from their approval, but from the undeniable evidence, the voice of the only person who had ever believed in me. And in that silence, with the truth echoing in every corner of the glittering ballroom, I felt the balance of power shift forever. The silence that followed my grandfather's final words was broken by a wave of whispers, sharp and cutting like knives in the dark. Guests who had laughed at me only moments ago now turned their eyes toward my parents and my sister, their expressions twisted with judgment. Some muttered about deception, others about greed. My father, once towering with pride, now looked shrunken, clutching the back of a chair as though the marble floor beneath him might give way. My mother dabbed at her forehead with a trembling handkerchief. Her lipstick smudged her composure, unraveling thread by thread. My sister, the self-proclaimed queen, stood trembling, her glassy eyes darting around the room in desperation, searching for someone to defend her. No one stepped forward. The lawyer, still composed, cleared his throat. "The assets are now frozen under court supervision until the transfer is finalized. Any attempt to interfere will be considered fraud." His words landed like iron bars locking into place. My father blurted, his voice cracking, "You can't do this. I built this legacy. She doesn't deserve it." The lawyer's gaze didn't waver. "You may contest it if you wish, but the evidence is indisputable. Any false claim will expose you further, and the penalties could be severe." Gasps rippled through the room again, the threat of legal consequence hanging heavy in the air. My sister's mascara streaked down her cheeks as she clutched my mother's arm, whispering frantically, "Do something, stop this, make it go away." My mother only stared at the floor, her silence finally breaking into sobs. The mighty throne they had built around her had crumbled in minutes, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, powerless. And then, as if summoned by fate's cruel sense of timing, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "David, my ex-husband." He strode into the ballroom, his hair slicked back, his smile as smooth as ever. "Darling," he said loudly enough for all to hear, "I came as soon as I heard. Congratulations. I knew you had greatness in you." Gasps spread again, but this time tinged with disgust. Some guests whispered about how quickly he had returned, how shameless he looked. I stared at him, bile rising in my throat. Only months earlier, he had abandoned me with venom on his tongue, sneering that I had nothing to offer. Now, smelling money, he slithered back with open arms. My sister's face twisted in fury, realizing she wasn't the only one who had lost power tonight. My father snarled at him, "Get out, you leech!" But David ignored him, stepping closer to me. "We can start over," he said smoothly. "Forget the past. We can build something together now." The crowd weighted the tension sharp, as though everyone wanted to see how I would respond. I met his gaze, my voice steady cold. "There are no second chances for betrayal." The words hung heavy, slicing through his smile until it collapsed into a sneer. He muttered a curse and stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like the sound of a door slamming forever. My sister screamed, her voice breaking. "This is mine. It's supposed to be mine." She lunged for the papers again, but security guards summoned quietly by the lawyer stepped forward and held her back. She kicked and flailed, but her protests were drowned by the whispers of the crowd, each murmur another stone on her crumbling throne. My parents sank into chairs, pale and defeated, the dynasty they thought they had secured, slipping away before their eyes. For decades they had mocked me, erased me, laughed at me. Now the judgment was theirs to endure, played out not in whispers behind closed doors, but under the unforgiving glare of chandeliers and witnesses. And as I stood there, papers still in my trembling hands, I realized the humiliation they had forced on me had boomeranged back with brutal precision. This was no longer their victory, no longer their empire. Their downfall was written in every whisper, every turned glance, every note of condemnation that filled the glittering ballroom. In the weeks that followed, the glittering ballroom scene became the story everyone in town whispered about. Newspapers ran discreet headlines, blogs speculated, and distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly sent cautious messages. But I didn't answer. My focus was not on gossip or on the hollow apologies that trickled in from those who had mocked me. My focus was on rebuilding the life they had tried to erase. The court finalized the transfer, the assets moved under my name, and for the first time in my life, the power that had been used to humiliate me now rested in my own hands. I walked through the mansion that had once been flaunted as my sister's prize. Its marble floors echoed with my footsteps, but instead of feeling like a museum of their pride, it felt like a canvas for my future. I stripped away the pretentious portraits my parents had hung, the ones that glorified wealth while erasing compassion, and replaced them with art from local creators' voices as overlooked as I had once been. The Tesla collection gleamed in the garage, but I drove only one, donating the rest to charities that auctioned them to fund scholarships. The $75 million that had once been their weapon of favoritism, I funneled carefully into causes my grandfather would have respected: community programs, educational grants rebuilding homes for families who had nothing. With every signature, every check written, I felt a piece of my dignity stitch itself back together. My parents tried to reach out at first. Letters filled with excuses, with phrases like, "We only wanted what was best for you and you have to understand." But I didn't have to understand, and I didn't answer. They had taught me for years that silence was a form of betrayal, and now I returned that lesson. My sister's attempts were more desperate, dripping with rage and entitlement. She filed to contest the will, but the evidence was ironclad. The video of my grandfather's declaration replayed in court, her screams and outbursts recorded in transcripts. The case collapsed, leaving her not only stripped of the fortune she had claimed, but burdened with legal costs and public disgrace. I heard through whispers that she lost friends, that business partners cut ties, that the mansion she once dreamed of commanding was now a symbol of her downfall. I didn't rejoice in her ruin. I simply let it stand as the natural consequence of her greed. And then there was David. He tried one more time, sending flowers to my office, a note scrawled with apologies and promises. I didn't even open the card. I asked the secretary to throw it away. Betrayal does not get second chances. One evening months later, I sat on the back porch of the mansion, the air cool, cicadas humming in the distance, honeysuckle drifting through the air. I held the brass key my grandfather had given me, finally fitting it into a small chest I had found in his old study. Inside were more letters, more words of encouragement, more reminders that he had always seen me, even when no one else did. Tears slid down my cheeks, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of strength. His faith had not been wasted. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the heir, not just to wealth, but to truth, to resilience, to dignity. And so, when people ask me what justice feels like, I tell them it feels like breathing freely after years of suffocating. It feels like stepping into sunlight after being locked in a cellar. It feels like finally looking in the mirror and seeing not the useless girl my family defined me as, but the woman I chose to become. If you are watching this, I want you to remember something. Being underestimated does not define your worth. Being betrayed does not end your story. Justice may take time, but it will come, and when it does, it will shine brighter than any chandelier in a ballroom. To those of you who have felt invisible, who have been mocked or overlooked, let my story remind you that silence is not the end. The truth is louder than greed, stronger than betrayal, and it will find its way to light. If you've ever faced favoritism in your family, if you've ever felt erased, I want you to share your story in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from because your voice matters and you deserve to be heard. Hit the like button if you believe justice always finds a way, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, of betrayal overcome, of dignity restored. Together, we can build a place where no one is invisible,